What do you feel when you hear music? I get that feels like a question for the spiritual or the heavy thinkers, but really, what do you feel? We all feel something. An aroma, an emotion, a fear, a strife. All of us are bound by very few things in life. One of them, the hold on us that a combined battalion of sound waves has the ability to conjure out of nothing. Absolutely nothing. It's astonishing what power just a few notes, drones and chords can do, particularly in accompaniment with the right kind of cinematic visual. This is a partnership always underestimated, marginally disregarded by many, and often entirely overlooked by the general viewing audience. What really takes a claim for our hearts and minds in a runtime often goes unnoticed. So, is it therefore meaningless? Or perhaps meaningful? Why should anybody even care? Today, we'll be dissecting such a question. I'm your host, Matthew May, and today we'll be discovering the beautiful bond between two of the most materialistically pointless, yet extraordinary creations of mankind as we know it. This is music. More specifically, this is the journey through a bond between music and the art of filmmaking. Music and film are a combination that has existed for over a century, and in complete sound body and mind, I would argue that neither medium can survive without the other, for longer than a narrowed period, that is. Would film even be good without it? My argument would be no. I passionately believe that film needs music to flourish in its most intense and powerful sequences, but also its most quiet and vulnerable ones as well. Music, in a way, is an indicator of emotions. If visuals construct meaning as the backbone of stories, and if writers, performers and dialogue conduct said stories, sound and music are responsible for indicating how we must feel about the story, as it moves through its process of taking us on a journey. Music, in fact, can change the entire feel of a film, I feel. It can make the smallest of adventures feel like they have world-ending consequences, or make the most epic of escapades feel like a walk in a park. So, how does music change a film exactly? Well, application is of course essential to consider in that. How music is applied to a sequence makes all the difference in its emotional interpretation from an audience. They just don't always notice it. Leitmotif is an example of application, where a unique sound is associated with a singular character or concept in order to associate and indicate emotion, truly complementing the visual storytelling, such as the iconic low notes in Jaws to indicate the impending onslaught of the shark, or the Imperial March from The Empire Strikes Back, positioned to, of course, indicate the arrival of the infamous Darth Vader. Leitmotif is a technique that filmmakers commonly use to provide an anchorage for this process of emotional indication with music and visuals I have previously described, using it to not only tell us how to react to a character and when, but also allow us to feel a disturbance, or joy, when these tracks of association are mixed into the soundtrack when characters are experiencing important moments in their arc. A key example of this would be when Tony and Pepper discuss him laying his superhero life to rest in the first act of Avengers Endgame. They are accompanied by a leitmotif assembly of notes by Alan Silvestri that return, spoiler alert, in the character's final living moments during the film's climax. This use of leitmotif also shows that it is an idea used, not only to identify character, but also create association with a concept, such as Tony letting go of the responsibility he feels towards everyone in his life, his guilt towards them. Alright, so, now, you know one example of how this powerful pair of music and film create meaning. But what about an example when there is no music at all? Well, consider the effect that silence would have on the church fight from Kingsman the Secret Service, without the application of Lynyrd Skynyrd's Freebird, or any of the iconic modern sequences that are solely iconic because of their music choices. Another example is the ear removal scene from Quentin's Reservoir Dogs. If you're not familiar with either of these, then the links are in the description, and I might say they are delightful watches for the mentally unstable, demented, and unsalvageable such as me, but you get my point, to those that are familiar. If you left these music choices on the cutting room floor, and what solely remained was the gunshots echoing amongst the horde of the congregation, or the screams of the victim as his limb is sliced away clean, there would be an entirely different effect. An effect of tension. More specifically, the effect that you are aware that there is no music. No Country for Old Men is perhaps the most potent instance of this, where there is essentially none or very little score for the entirety of the runtime. Believe me, it was the easiest working day of that composer's life. Imagine a world where Anton Chigurh milked the shit out of those Mexicans to fucking Barracuda. Now, that's entertainment. Take notes, Hollywood. Jokes aside, that's the true power of music and visuals. The potential for entertainment. Now that we've talked about the power of their combination, it's time to begin the two-part downhill slope of our discussion, and briefly go over how composers have delivered on a particular style of these audible applications throughout the decades. Believe me, if I take too long with this, I get too excited and I'll be left in a bit of a mess. Well, that line sounded better in my head. I surmised a strategy to break down the many types of composed music on productions. It involved breaking the culture down into three key areas: the sound of a classic, the sound of grandeur, and the sound of the senses. For each, I will use composers still working nowadays to make light of all this nonsense. The sound of a classic is a particular auditory quality I would best associate with the work of Alan Menken and, of course, Mr. John Williams, arguably the greatest cinematic composer of all time. Have you ever wondered how you truly feel the Disney magic in films like The Little Mermaid or Beauty and the Beast? Or even more recently in incredibly popular entries from the Mouse House like Tangled? Yep. Blame Alan Menken for your loss of hearing during family karaoke night. As for Williams, it really goes without saying. We'll discuss him further shortly, but just take a moment to reflect on how, in all his films, both of these composers really, in all of their works, the music is memorable and makes an abundantly clear statement on you and your Uncle Spotify Wrapped every year. I'm not sure it's a coincidence. Hence, the sound of a classic. The sound of grandeur is surprisingly homogeneous to me, and perhaps you'll feel the same once I explain it. Now, here comes the likes of Giacchino and Zimmer into the picture. Titans in their own right for sure, but very consistent. Perhaps even too consistent with their compositions. To me, they implement a house style across an individual project and maintain that sound throughout. The biggest thing to note about these kinds of composers, I would say, is that their music seems to often be the most apt and on the mark of all three corners of this triangle, blending into scenes, rather than standing out and quite literally making one. Finally, we have my favourite of the bunch, the sound of the senses, where music isn't exactly iconic, but makes so much of an impression that even the instruments themselves become the stars of any scene. I find this to be the most commonly present feature in films composed by Justin Hurwitz, Lorne Balfe, Ludwig Göransson, and last but not least, Thomas Newman. Finally, to bring our discussion to an end, let's take a glance over how composers and directors have formed long-lasting career relationships and what influence masters of both crafts have in each other's extended company, truly vital for achieving a combined vision. First, let's cycle back to Williams and his best buddy on the block, commonly referred to as the greatest Hollywood director alive, Steven Spielberg. As the sound of a classic is alive and well in Williams' work, he composes for classics with triumph and presence. Much alike most of Spielberg's work, all his projects and works are considered timeless in their own right. Therefore, their relationship in the grand scheme of their individual legacies makes complete sense. Lastly though, I'd like to draw your attention to two director-composer combos in the area of the senses I've talked about before. Ludwig Göransson and Ryan Coogler, and Thomas Newman and Sam Mendes. Both modern pairs, much like my former, have had quite lengthy relationships in the industry, having worked on multiple projects together to provide a consistent experience for the audience. In this way, we can infer that even in industry, musical and visual relationships between directors and composers are meant to be for a mutually beneficial cause in both business and art. For examples of both pairs' work together, Ryan and Ludwig have combined their efforts on the first Creed film and both Black Panther and its sequel, Black Panther Wakanda Forever, creating a unique and cultural audible style to the Kingdom of Wakanda in recent years. As for Mendes and my hubby, Tom Newman, their work together on both Skyfall and Spectre for the Bond franchise, as well as on the Rewards Triumph 1917, create an orchestral feast of atmospheric pleasure that benefits everyone involved and watching, with bold strings and powerful horns. Needless to say, the composer is and should definitely now be considered the director's best friend. As of now, I compose my own stuff, so I just have friends. Today, we have uncovered all kinds of reasons as to why this bond of artistry is so vital for the future of visual entertainment, whether that be through application and usage of skill, variety in style, or the effect of industry relationships on the craft. If there was one thing, however, that I would stress more than anything else to be the most important reason why both music and film's timeless matrimony should be held in such high regard, it would be because I love it. I love them too much. I ask you now, don't we all? I've been your host, Matthew May. Be sure to stay tuned for more, and as always, I'll see you all again soon. Goodbye.